If you want to succeed in rent-to-rent, you need more than just numbers and a pitch. You need to communicate clearly, confidently, in a way that builds trust fast. We're constantly fine-tuning how we speak, pitch, and present, and it's why our mentees' viewing to deal ratio is through the roof. From landlord calls to deal analysis, viewings, objection handling, communication is a skill that underpins every part of this business model. In this video, I'll show you the exact framework our students use to speak with impact, close more deals without sounding salesy or overcomplicating it. If you're ready to level up, be taken seriously, and start landing more deals, this is where it starts. First of all, I'd like to start by saying I'm not here to teach grandma to suck eggs. The reason I preface this whole thing by saying that is that lots of people think and believe that the way they learn things is optimal and that it works best for them, and I'm not here to argue with that. I'm just here to suggest a way in which you might be able to improve that process. So working with mentees personally and within our ecosystem, what I've noticed is many people are listening to the right stuff, and to an extent they're understanding those bits and pieces too. But when it comes to implementation, no one gets perfect, right? It's not going to work like that every time. But what you can do is improve your likelihood of it going right. So the way in which I've implemented this in the past is using a technique invented by Richard Feynman. My background is in education and in physics specifically. He's my idol. He's my favorite physicist. And what he was able to do really effectively was turn extremely complicated concepts, QED is a really famous one, into really simple models that grade school kids can understand. So I'm not suggesting for a second that that's what I need to do here with you guys today, but he came up with a system called the Feynman loop. So what it's originally called is we've got the Feynman Technique, and it is all about this loop process.
I hope you're getting massive value from this video. Just a quick announcement to let you know we are now doing live rent-to-rent discovery days where we get off the screen and into a real room with real people to build a real rent-to-rent roadmap. If that sounds good, hit the link below this video to find out the next event.
The way it works and most effective is we pick an aspect of our rent-to-rent business model process, and I'm going to explain this in terms of a deal analysis scenario, as well as the viewing and of course contracts. So let's just start by breaking it down. We're going to choose our concept. Once we've chosen the concept, the first thing you want to be able to do is attempt to teach it. Sounds like a bit of a leap, right? But by doing so, you will very quickly realize your gaps. Having done a bit of teaching and explained it to your pet, your guinea pig, your dog, whatever it is, you might upgrade to a family member or friends. But what you'll very quickly identify are gaps in your knowledge. And that's not something to be afraid of or run away from. In fact, you want to lean into it, because by doing so, we can start to refine the process. Now, let's just link this up so we know what direction we're all moving in here. So having done that, what do you think you've done in identifying what needs refining? Is we're going to move on to make sure that we upgrade it. And this is where I have conversations with mentees in particular where we do calls with an actual focus, and we make sure we're really clinical in our approach to refining the bits and pieces they've identified. Once you've done that, the key here really is to jump back in at the deep end, and I want you to teach it again. Because at that stage, you will know whether or not your refining process has worked. And if you've done that right, then what you do is you go back in and choose a new topic. Simple enough, right? And yet 90% of the people I've ever worked with didn't know this process existed, and even having known about it, weren't implementing it. I'll just use an example here. So we use a really, really useful document and resource called the Viewing Bible. I've not got a lot of room here, but I'll try and break it down here. And the way the viewing Bible works is it pretty much follows this principle. So I want to make sure that we identify the key principles of the viewing, because that's what this Bible is all about, is making sure you conduct a viewing optimally. So got the key principles. Second of all, what's the structure? What's the viewing structure? So obviously partly it's a start, middle, end situation along this continuum. But there are strategies to implement at each stage. And that's why this loop's so important, because you learn on the job and you refine in between. And then finally, just to use this example here, maybe for us in that viewing Bible, it's the 4 key elements of every viewing. And once you've identified the bits and pieces you're going to be implementing, you can decide, can you teach this stuff? Can you explain it effectively? And I don't mean with jargon. I don't mean using complicated terminology. Better actually that you can teach it in a way that if your best mate texts you saying, can you just explain how to overcome an objection if a landlord says that the rental increase won't work? Great. Well, if you can reply in a text message simply enough, being able to explain that situation and an answer to it, then you probably understand it well enough to do it on the job. So that's the first thing I want to cover, and it's going to frame the rest of this video because I'm going to show how to do that in terms of deal analysis on the viewing, but also partly contracts too. So let's move on. I've explained the principle behind this learning strategy, and the aim, remember, is to optimize everything you do. Just like to call out those of you watching this video now who might fall into some of these categories, because what I'd like to start with as we build on the Feynman model is what I'm going to call the clarity ladder. Loving it. So the reason that this is important is you might identify yourselves within this structure. So first rung of my ladder is you've maybe heard the video describing how to negotiate with landlords early on this channel. And maybe that's just where you stopped. Maybe you didn't progress any further than that, because hearing's great, but we're going to improve at every stage here. And maybe you've watched bits and pieces like that, maybe even within this video, others across the platform. Maybe you've got to a stage where you understand it, and you convinced yourself that the principle of termination versus break clauses and bits and pieces like that, you understand it. And yet, so often people in that realm are unable to move to the next rung on the ladder, which is being able to explain. And when put under pressure to do so, you'd be surprised how many fail at that rung here. But even better than that, because remember, there's a deal at the end of this, so I promise it's worth it. Next thing you need to be able to do, and this is the bit like texting your mate, is can you simplify it? Can you break it down into its core components? Because the better you are at that, the better your communication is going to be. I'm going to say this a lot through the video, be it landlord, agent, potential investor, a networking opportunity, maybe even a joint venture. If you can't do this stuff properly, your positioning will be gone. No one's going to trust you. And even if you've got a great elevator pitch, this surface level, and you won't get beyond that. So the gold star here is the reason that I've decided to implement the Feynman technique in the first place. Is can you teach it? So I want to use this as an example now. In terms of teaching, what about, let's say that you're on your viewing, because I want to frame it around the viewing here. Let's say you're on a viewing and you've heard how to do it, and you realize that you're going to say to the landlord that you've got an offer and it's going to help them in some way. Okay, great. you've probably got this box ticked here. In fact, better. You've understood the principle of what you bring to the table. Hopefully it's win-win. Great. You've done your best to communicate to the landlord and explain the benefits for them. Absolutely fantastic. But if you can't do that with the right communication techniques and you're using jargon just because you've heard it elsewhere, the landlord won't understand either. And when they scratch the surface, it's going to expose a bunch of stuff that will put you on the spot and often won't result in the success you're looking for. So if you can do the simplification bit, the reason that's so powerful is you might get to a stage where the landlord asks about rent increase, it's within the 5-10% range per year, and they want to lock it in. And if you don't know how you're going to solve that problem with the rent increase, how would you be able to explain that sensibly? How would you explain it effectively? Same would be true even for the term. I mentioned break clause and termination. If you can't do that effectively in a way that has identified the problem that you're solving, you're going to struggle. Another good example would be contracts as well. Maybe you've not even had a look at how it protects the landlord. It's difficult to talk about contracts simply, but that's why it's great to get good at it, because you might have that termination. They might be concerned about the length of time you're controlling that property for. Bear that in mind as well. And I suppose finally for me, the other big one is like, who's staying in the property question, because these are the main concerns on the viewing. And if you can teach these bits and pieces, I've highlighted briefly here, then you're on to a winner. So this last one is who's staying in the property, and maybe it's a question of how you vet them, for example. So consider all those as you move forward in this model, because I want to apply it to deal analysis and contracts as well. As promised, I mentioned about deal analysis, viewing and contracts. So let's start with the first one. And remember, the reason I'm showing you these things is so you can identify where within the Feynman loop you are. And on that clarity ladder, are you just listening in? You think you understand it, but are you at the stage where you can simplify this stuff? So I'm going to give you the tools to go away and research and where to do that. And you can build it out into your own delivery, how you approach landlords and how you secure good quality deals. So the first thing is, when it comes to any deal analysis on a rent-to-rent basis here, I'm going to make use of all the space on this one. You probably want to know, first of all, what's the rent average in the area? Because every property will be on the market at a given rate, and this is monthly, remember. Does it make sense? Where are you going to find out if that's legit? So, for example, OpenRent's a great place to do this. So is Rightmove, so Zoopla. So do your research and make sure that on the rental market, it's in line with the competition, both in terms of location, size, type. Next up, you want to have a little look at what's the ADR. So we talk about nightly rates, and ADR is average daily rate, but it's how much people are being charged per night in this case. So your ADR, generally speaking, you want to check out Airbnb, Booking.com. Also have a look on Google Maps. If you go in the filters at the top, you can hit hotels, and there's a subsection there where you can look at holiday lets as well. I quite like looking there. It gives you extra data, and for me, I'm pretty data driven. More data, better. Consider that top tip. Next on my list here that I'd certainly want to have a look at is going to be your avatar. And so many ways to do this. I think places I would begin, I want to have a look at local businesses. Who's in the area? Who's got footfall? Who moves employees around? How long have they been there for? are they this size business that I might be able to help accommodate? So check out your local businesses, super easy to do. You can use the filters on Google Maps to help you do that as well. I really like to look at reviews as well. This can be across all of the previous platforms, remember. I want to know what the good, the bad, the ugly was for the people who stayed in those properties. Really easy to do that on Airbnb. Top tip, grab all those reviews, bag it in ChatGPT and get it to analyze the good, the bad, the ugly. And you'll very quickly be able to determine what types of people are staying in those types of properties and give you a really good idea of who your avatar is likely to be for any given area. Next, I quite like to have a little look. Local planning. If you go check out your council website, reach out to them directly. Freedom of information allows us to check out what planning permission has been granted, and it's really, really interesting to see what's been approved and even the length of time that some of those projects are taking place over. And another way to do that, another top tip actually, is lots of platforms to do this on. They're all basically free as far as I know, but if you use Google Construction Map, you'll be able to have a little look in your area, all over the country, who the principal contractors are for approved projects and even who's paying for it. And once you know both of those things, you can very quickly work out who your avatar might be. Hopefully you're still with me. Maybe you're in that understanding section right now. Just always be thinking, can I explain the depth as to why I'm doing this stuff? And hopefully I've helped you along the way already. Let's just move over here. For me now, I want to know pretty much whether or not the numbers stack for my property. So I want to know about the occupancy, both in terms of a percentage within a monthly basis, because obviously I'm paying the rent monthly. So I guess we could put a percentage here as well. I want to know what the revenue looks like. And I probably want to be able to check out my competition. I don't just mean who else is there necessarily. That's really useful to know. But more importantly, I would back myself and mentees to be in the top 20% of the properties in any given area, because that's the service and quality we aim for. So I want to know what the top properties are saying. And my favorite tool to do all of this, by the way, Property Market Intel. There are lots of platforms that allow you to do this level of analysis. That happens to be my favorite, the one that we train on and make sure mentees know how to use. Lots and lots of tools in there, but fundamentally these are the principles. Again, be thinking, can you explain? Can you simplify this? In time, I'm sure you will. Final one on my list is we've got a deal calculator both for serviced accommodation and HMO, but let's say that within your calculator, fundamentally, having done all these bits and pieces, particularly got some of this data, I would really, really be interested on my break-even occupancy. But just as important would be my break-even in terms of how many months it would take me to break even on all of my costs into a property. And of course, you'd have to estimate some furniture and maybe some cosmetic bits and pieces. Just to clarify, so that's break-even occupancy and a monthly one here. And roughly speaking, just so you know, further your explanation and your ability to communicate this break-even occupancy, we sort of have a fairly arbitrary line drawn at 50% break-even to indicate a profitable deal. But that's up to your risk tolerance, and it's on a case-by-case basis. So digest that, take a screenshot, go through it, see if you can teach it, and if you can, you're probably good enough to make this stuff work really, really well. Deal analysis, fundamentals done. I promise you we'd go through the viewing as well. Remember the frame here, we're on that ladder. Are you just listening? In which case you don't care. Are you trying to get that understanding through to that sort of synthesis? Can you explain it simply and eventually teach it? So I'll break down the principles. and you can fill in the gaps as you're going. So the viewing, and I'm going to need a little bit more space this time, I think, because there's quite a lot going on. And for those of you who've done a bunch of viewings, you can probably relate. Let's highlight the principles of a viewing first. So if I call this bit principles, first of all, are you dealing with a direct to vendor opportunity, or is it an agent? Super key, because how you approach the rest of the viewing could differ. But remember, I'm breaking down the principles as generically as I can so that you can apply it in both cases. Once you've identified your audience effectively, you need to know if they're a person of influence. The reason being, there'd be no point necessarily pitching your full business model and everything you bring to the table to someone who is unlikely to be able to say yes on the day. And I'll save that for another video, because there is a really, really cool way of doing that. Once you've identified a person of influence, you know how to approach, and you'll be able to apply more of the principles I'm about to show you. And once you've done that, always be thinking that everything you offer, you pitch, you explain, they need to understand. So sort of do they understand the offer? Really, really key. And I suppose if I was to go a layer deeper, as you know, part of questioning, which I often cover, and I go into a lot of detail with my mentees, I love to pull the thread, as I say. So sort of what's the motivation? What's the motivation for this person? And finally, I guess it's like you want to be active listening. You're listening for cues. And you do that as part of the order of the viewing I'm going to just show you now as well. So if they're the principles, this is the order. Hopefully still with me. So intro sounds really generic, doesn't it? But it's so, so important, because this is where you position yourself as being the sort of person that would be a great tenant for said landlord or agent, depending on whether you've gone with a direct or indirect method of approach and where you found this lead. But no matter how the introduction goes and the basis behind it, really, really important. You've got to ask permission. And what I mean by that is asking permission to ask questions. Just to role play that with you, meeting a landlord for the first time. Hi, is it John? Lovely to meet you. My name's Guy. Listen, John, before we kick things off, would you be opposed to me asking you a few questions just to find out what you're looking for in a perfect let? Notice how I framed it. Would you be opposed to? It's really difficult for anybody to answer that question with a yes or a no, and it'd be meaningful, because yes, I would be opposed. No, I'm not opposed. Most people go, yeah, whatever. In which case, it now doesn't matter if I ask some questions that you probably otherwise wouldn't have done. Really, really key. So moving on. Intro, done. You've asked permission. Then you kick off the viewing. You're going to go see the property. So you're going to begin the viewing. And we provide mentees with a checklist of everything to look out for on a viewing. But I'm sure you can imagine there's some pretty sensible things in terms of amenities, what looks good, what doesn't, condition of carpets, ceilings, damp, mold, all that good stuff, just to elucidate on a few of them. But really important here, walk and talk. Walk and talk. Love that. Again, that active listening. And this is where you would ask your favorite questions. In between the rapport building, which I'm going to mention as part of a separate piece on this paper, you're going to move from rapport into discovery. And that's where some key questions I love to ask around who the previous tenants were and what happened to them and what the situation was around that, who manages the property and how long that's been the case. And I'm trying to find a scenario that would motivate a landlord or agent to want to work with me. So we begin the viewing, we've done the walk and talk. At the end, really, really key, all you've got to do, because remember, you should be doing minimum 3 viewings a week if you want to, in line with our data, close that first deal. So within the first month or so is average. And to do that, you need to make sure that you say yes on every viewing appropriately. But also, if you're doing lots of viewings, it's really, really easy to forget what was what, which property looked like it would work and which ones wouldn't. So please get a video, pictures, log it, save them, put them in a folder. Worst case scenario, this landlord agent situation would go into your CRM or just a spreadsheet, and you're going to track your viewings and make sure that not only do you learn as you go, because remember, we're going to go from just hearing and listening to the stuff through to be able to teach it. And to do that, you're going to learn on every single viewing. So we've done the principles, we've done the order of the viewing, and finally, I want to just go through, I guess I'd call it the elements. It's probably where we're at. Where can I fit this in here? Apologies for the overlap. I mentioned it before. Build rapport, listen for cues, walk and talk, ask great questions. I've already given you a bunch to start with there. But remember, always thinking, like, why? Why was that asked? Why is this order important? Could you teach it? If you can say yes to that question, you're probably doing a great job. So build rapport. Second principle here, super key, the property itself. Size, how it would accommodate your guests, tenants equally, all that good stuff. And if it's not appropriate, you need to know that early on. So clearly, for a good deal, you need to make sure that it fits the bill. Third one here, through your questioning that we discussed earlier, you're going to find, I'm going to call it the problem here. But in reality, although I'm sure as you know, lots of landlords got problems, but it's not always a problem. Sometimes it's just a motivator or something they would rather have be the case, even if there isn't strictly a problem. But you're going to do that through your questioning. That all happens during the viewing. And then finally, although, like I said, we're moving on to contracts just now, you're going to provide the solution. Grab those bits and pieces, see if they make sense, see if you go deeper, you'd be able to explain them in more depth, and then could you teach someone else how to do this? And if you can, the deal's likely yours. And the fine tuning continues. Deal analysis done. We've been through the viewing. And the last piece of refinement I promised I'd take you through today is contracts. Now, obviously, in terms of our agreement pack, it's tens of hours of content on the minutiae of the legal process and making sure you do this stuff safely, protecting both yourself, the landlord, the agent, etc. But the principles are what I want to break down here, which gives you the opportunity to go away, dig a bit deeper, ask lots of whys, and hopefully get to a stage where you'll be able to, quote unquote, teach this yourself, at which point I'm going to show you how to implement the learning process after this. So let's just crack into it. Contracts. As you might already know, those of you well versed, we're going to split this into 2 categories. There are lots of types of contract to use, but our recommendations fall into 2 categories. The first of which is a management agreement, and to save you waiting to hear the second one, it's a company-let agreement. So let's start with the management one. Lots of principles will be the same here, but fundamentally, you want to make sure you check all of the following and more, obviously. I'm not a solicitor, not a lawyer. This is what I know to be the case, and it served my mentees well. So first of all, What's the termination saying? Does it suit you? Does it suit the landlord? Could you use it as part of your negotiation? I'm sure so. So bear that in mind as you deep dive. Liability. Who's responsible for what? Who's responsible for what if what goes wrong? And fundamentally, how responsibility is divvied up. Really, really important. Make sure they're detailed. More detail, the better. Obviously, with it being a landlord's property fundamentally, really, really important to look at mortgages and insurance and just make sure that stuff aligns. It's clearly the landlord's responsibility to make sure those are in place, but it's something I've got to highlight. Mortgage and insurance. Let's talk a bit about break clauses. Now, people get these confused with termination as well. This can be an opportunity for you to negotiate a shorter term into a more bite-sized piece for a landlord to trial working with you. But remember, never put a break clause before the point at which you would be meaningfully profitable. So never before your monthly break even that we described earlier. Finally, really, really important to nip this one in the bud. I'm going to call it a rent review. And I really don't like that terminology. As a landlord, that's how we often understand the increase in rent. You review it and you decide where you want it to move to, often between tenants, or obviously it can happen during an AST tenancy as well. I would prefer to lock in an actual percentage at an actual point of time within the term, but something to recognise and would often be included in the agreement. So, management agreement done. Let's have a look at company let. All of these still apply here, guys. I'm not trying to say that they're not important over here, but there's no point writing them again, right? So let's just dig a bit deeper into the differences here. First of all, this management agreement would likely be yours. Not many landlords have their own management agreements, lease agreements lying around. So fundamentally, the company let agreement physically would likely be the letting agents. Yes, it's great to have your own, and they are a dime a dozen. You can go Google them and find them. I'm not saying use those, but in case you want to, you can. Using theirs means that you likely wouldn't be well versed, so you need to know what to look for, and I'll build on that just now. Not only would they be using their company let agreement, likely, but also you'd have to pass a load of checks. Most importantly here is there's an element of affordability. If you've ever rented before, you'll understand that agents use this 30 to 36x rent in terms of your affordability. So just have a look at that, make sure it makes sense, because you're unlikely to work closely with a landlord on a rent-to-rent deal if you weren't able to do this. There are ways to mitigate it, but just bear that in mind as you move forward. For me, having a landlord on board is a one-of-one situation. Not many landlords are on the spot likely to hand over multiple properties, although looking at our mentors, mentees alike, many of them have got multiple deals with the same landlords. That's a relationship building piece that we work on really closely. But a landlord on average in the UK, portfolios somewhere between 2 and 5 properties, that's nationwide, but letting agents clearly often have hundreds. So just make sure that you're going to be able to be as flexible as you can, because if you get your first deal over the line with an agent, by understanding this process, more deals are likely to follow, because you're going to do a great job, and then you get the win-win-win-win that I always talk about, where guests and tenants get a great stay, you get paid for the hard work and expertise you bring to the table, agent takes their percentage based on the agreement they have with the landlord gets paid the rent guaranteed. So incorporate flexibility into your approach. Really, really important. This is the bit that we detail massively inside our agreement pack, but traditionally, an agent company let agreement, so off the shelf, won't have all of the clauses necessary for us to operate our business model legally. Just to give you an idea here, we're going to be needing to add and remove a number of clauses. A good example would be if you're looking to run a property as an HMO and you're helping the landlord take it through licensing, it likely wouldn't include in the company agreement the ability to change locks. Lots of company agreements don't have that in place, and you would need to make an amendment like that so that it was suitable for your business model in the HMO scenario I've just described. So yeah, they're the fundamentals, guys. Remember, through the frame of, am I just listening? Do I understand why these are the case? Do your deep dive, see if you can synthesize it, see if you can teach someone else how to do this. And if you can, winner, winner. If not, rinse and repeat. There's a bunch of other stuff in here to watch as well. Let's have a little look at how we can actually implement this now. This is the crux, guys. Having heard all the other stuff, the herd, the listening people, the truth of implementation is far more deliberate. There's a term here called deliberate practice in the literature, and I'm going to help you implement that. So let's just call this implementation. Super good. And as we move through the process, first thing I'd like you to do, in fact, let's break this down like this, actually. So the first thing I'd like you to do is ask why. I've shown you a lot of stuff today, and as you move to that area of explanation, just beyond the understanding section in the clarity ladder, it's really, really powerful to continue to ask yourself why. And just to give you an example of that, like, why would a landlord agree? Well, because the service offered is great, because he needs a hands-off approach. Okay, well, why? Or because he's moving abroad. Okay, well, why? Oh, because the portfolio is managed externally, and he's got a clever taxation system going on. Whatever it is, if you keep asking why, you'll get to this golden nugget, this singularity, and it works with all of this stuff. Here's another one. Why are we profitable? What makes it profitable? Well, I've explained it a number of times, even in this video, but it's because we offer a great service that we're remunerated for, and it's based on occupancy of the property that the landlord otherwise wouldn't have achieved. Okay, well, why? Because we provide a great place people want to stay. Okay, well, why? Well, we do it in a given area because there's footfall. Okay, why? Well, because there's businesses there, it drives them out. Why? Well, if you keep asking why, and you can explain the answer every time, you'll reach a level far beyond the competition. And if there's ever a way to understand a business model, this is it. And I think the other, I touched on it there, why does it work in certain areas? And again, so that local businesses and who's moving around. And I told you to look through the reviews on previous properties in this video. Who's staying where and why? So just always asking why. Another thing to consider within this implementation is, to be honest, you just got to just do it. Like, literally, just do it.
Do it! Just do it!
Super key. Lots of people listen and never do. Maybe you're currently here thinking that's me. I'm sure we've all got examples of where that's been the case. I would say just pick one topic. Don't try and do it all. That's one of the common mistakes I'm going to cover. Just pick one topic, write it down. The reason I say write it down, there's something physical, tangible about doing that. And it actually, your brain processes things differently when they're written. So even if it's not something you like doing, and as you can tell by my handwriting, I don't do a lot of that, but write it down, make it real. Here's the scary bit. Record yourself. Literally, do it on your phone. It could be verbally, it could be on camera, whatever you feel most comfortable with initially, and then step out of your comfort zone. Record yourself doing it. Even teaching somebody it, you'll see where the gaps in your knowledge are and where you feel less comfortable. That's the stuff you focus on. Also, as you watch it back, look for those cues that a landlord or an agent or an investor, JV partner, would consider a wobble. You'll see it. It's where you stutter. It's where I move my eyes around a lot when I'm thinking. You can probably see that. Maybe that's something you do as well. So just consider that too. And finally, that's where you're going to revise it. And I think I called it relearn at some stage here. That's where we just do iteration, iteration, iteration until you get good. Finally, I touched on it very briefly. Common mistakes. There's so many here, but I said pick one. It's like the converse, isn't it? So about how small that is. Don't pick too many. Focus on one thing only. You won't be able to learn everything at once. I would recommend doing it chronologically through the process. So being able to analyze deals first before thinking about doing viewings, and then how you would close deals and do contracts, probably in that order is a good way to do it. Plus it does increase in complexity throughout the process. So make sure bit by bit, drip feed, don't bite off more than you can chew. At once, I've said it lots, although I think I've contradicted myself slightly. Jargon. Don't copy other people's jargon to explain something you don't understand properly. Break it down into what it really means and how you can get it done without using complicated terminology. If you can do that, you're well on the way to being able to teach it effectively. Don't skip the writing bit. As I'm doing here and breaking it down, maybe you just replicate this process, but write it down somewhere. I like to use Notion, is where my second brain, where I dump all the stuff. But it's really, really good to revisit that because you're going to need to. And if you put hard work into implementing stuff, the notes are going to be useful alongside that. So make sure you make notes, keep them. Somewhere digital is probably the way to do it. And this is probably the biggest one. Avoidance. It's really easy. Maybe back in your school days, there were topics you would rather have revised than others. Well, guess what? The ones you skipped were the ones you probably did less well in. They were probably the ones that were the hardest and therefore probably the most important to differentiate you from everyone else. Don't avoid the tough stuff. The magic lies in the work you're avoiding is a Chris Williamson quote that I love. Don't avoid the tough stuff. Make sure you implement it. And alongside asking the whys, just getting it done and avoiding these common mistakes, I think you'll find success here.